I turned 60 last spring, and the morning started like any other in my quiet Asheville home. The coffee pot hissed, the porch swing creaked under my weight, and the lawn stretched out before me, stubbornly brown despite my best efforts. It wasn't a milestone birthday, not the kind you celebrate with balloons or banners. It just felt heavy like the air before a storm. I'd grown used to the solitude, the way silence wraps around you, when the people you love stop calling. 3 years ago, my son Elias cut me out of his life, and I'd learned to live with the ache. But that morning, as I sipped my coffee, a single knock at the door changed everything. It wasn't the hurried tap of the mailman or the eager knock of a neighbor. It was deliberate singular, followed by the crunch of footsteps fading away. I opened the door, and there it was, a plain brown package, taped with care, tied with a thin blue ribbon. My name, Maria Grayson, stared back at me in handwriting I'd know anywhere. Elias's, precise, angular, like a blueprint drawn in blue ink. I hadn't seen it in years, but it hit me like a memory you didn't know you'd buried. My hands froze on the doormat, bare feet cold against the wood. I whispered my own name, testing how it sounded in his script. I carried the box inside, my heart thudding not with joy, but something sharper. Curiosity, maybe laced with dread. Elias hadn't sent a card when I had pneumonia, hadn't called when my sister died. 3 years of nothing, and now this. I set it on the kitchen table, the ribbon catching the light. My coffee went cold as I sat there staring, my hands folded like I was waiting for permission to feel something. Inside, I knew, was a choice to open it or to let it sit unclaimed like the years between us. When I finally untied the ribbon, I found a white box, and inside, nestled in tissue, were cookies. Dozens of them, each one a tiny work of art. Blue flowers, golden leaves, stars dusted with sugar. Handmade, delicate, not like anything Elias would do. He'd never baked, never cared for sweets. Tucked inside was a small card, his handwriting again. "Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over." My throat tightened, a soft ache, blooming not quite tears, but close. I wanted to believe it was real, but something in me, something quiet and sure, whispered, "Be careful." That whisper would save my life. If you've listened this far, enjoyed my storytelling, and are eager for what's next, please let me know in the comments below. You can also like and subscribe to boost my spirit. Thank you so much. Let's continue the story together. The morning sun filtered through my Asheville kitchen, casting soft shadows across the linoleum. I sat at the table, the package from Elias, still unopened, its blue ribbon glinting like a warning. My coffee was cold now, but I didn't bother reheating it. My hands stayed folded in my lap, as if moving might commit me to something I wasn't ready for. 3 years. That's how long it had been since Elias last spoke to me. Not a fight, not a blowout, just a slow, deliberate drift, like a door closing 1 inch at a time. I'd replayed our last conversation 1,000 times, searching for the moment I lost him. I never found it. My house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the fridge. I'd retired from the library 2 years ago, trading bustling stacks for this stillness. I filled my days with crosswords, gardening the occasional book club, with neighbors who meant well but never stayed long. The lawn outside refused to green, no matter how much I watered it like it knew something I didn't. Elias used to visit back when he was still my son, not this stranger who sent packages out of nowhere. He'd sit on the porch swing, his long legs folded, always watching, always measuring. Even as a boy, he had a way of noticing too much. I thought about calling him just to hear his voice, to ask why now, why this, but my phone stayed untouched on the counter. Instead, memories crept in. Elias at 8, folding napkins into perfect triangles, scolding me if they weren't aligned. Elias at 12, silent for days when I bought the wrong brand of cereal. I'd called it quirks, told myself he was sensitive, brilliant. He was in his way, top of his class, a data analyst, now in Charlotte, piecing together patterns most people missed. But there was always something else, something I couldn't name. The way he'd watch me eat, his eyes lingering on my plate like he was waiting for a mistake. I stood pacing to the window, the package still there, a quiet challenge. I wanted to open it, to believe in the possibility of starting over. But my gut twisted a warning I'd ignored too often. Elias didn't do things without reason. Every move was calculated, every gesture precise. What was this, then? A gift or something else? I leaned against the counter, my reflection faint in the glass. 60 years old, and I was still learning how to be his mother. The box sat there waiting, and I wondered if I'd ever been ready for what was inside. The package sat on my kitchen table like an uninvited guest, its blue ribbon catching the morning light in my Asheville home. I couldn't stop staring at it, my fingers itching to untie the knot, but something held me back, a tightness in my chest, a whisper of doubt. Elias's handwriting on the label, Maria Grayson, was unmistakable, each letter sharp and deliberate, like he'd measured the space between them. 3 years of silence, and now this. I sank into a chair, the wood creaking under me, and let my mind drift to the boy he used to be hoping to find answers in the past. Elias was always different. At 10, he'd organize his books by spine color, then by publication date, glaring if I touched them. At 15, he'd rewrite my grocery lists, correcting my loops and curls, insisting his way was clearer. I'd laugh, call him my little engineer, but his intensity wasn't always charming. There were moments, small, sharp ones, when his eyes would linger too long, like when I baked his favorite oatmeal cookies and forgot the cinnamon. He'd push the plate away, his face blank, and not speak for hours. I told myself it was just his way, that he felt things deeply. But deep down, I wondered if I was missing something. Now at 60, I felt that same unease staring at his package. The house was still the only sound, the faint drip of the kitchen faucet I kept meaning to fix. I'd built a life here in Asheville, a small one, but mine walks in the Blue Ridge Mountains coffee with Rachel Harper, Elias's mother-in-law, who'd become a friend after he pulled away. Rachel was kind, always bringing me clippings from her florist shop, filling the gaps Elias left. I thought about calling her, asking what she knew about this gift, but that felt like admitting I was afraid of my own son. I reached for the ribbon, then stopped. What did I expect to find? An apology, a reason for the years of silence, or something worse. My hands trembled not from age, but from the weight of memory. Elias at 20, leaving for Charlotte, promising to call, then fading into a stranger. I'd written letters he never answered, left voicemails he never returned. Now, this package, this gesture, felt like a move in a game I didn't know we were playing. I pushed the box an inch away, as if distance could quiet the questions. Outside, the lawn stretched brown and brittle, mocking my efforts to nurture anything. I wondered if I'd ever known how to nurture him. The ribbon glinted, daring me to decide. The package from Elias sat untouched on my Asheville kitchen table, its blue ribbon a quiet taunt. I'd spent the morning circling it, my coffee cold, my crossword forgotten. The weight of 3 years without my son pressed against me, heavy as the humid spring air. I wanted to believe this was his way of reaching out a bridge across the silence, but my instincts screamed caution. I couldn't shake the memory of Elias's stillness, the way he'd watch me as a child, like he was cataloging my every move. Instead of opening the box, I made a choice, one that felt safer, kinder, but would unravel everything. Rachel Harper lived just 15 minutes away. Her florist shop, a burst of color in our small town. She was Elias's mother-in-law, married to his wife Lila's father, but she'd become my anchor after Elias cut me off. Rachel never pried, just offered tea and stories, her wind chimes singing on her porch. I decided she deserved something sweet, something to soften the sting of my birthday alone. So I picked up the package, rewrapped the ribbon, and drove to her place, the box steady, in my passenger seat. The Blue Ridge Mountains loomed in the distance, their green haze a contrast to my brittle lawn back home. When I handed Rachel the cookies, her eyes lit up. She protested, saying I should keep them, but I brushed it off with a smile, insisting she'd enjoy them more. I didn't tell her about the note inside Happy Birthday, Mom. Let's start over. It felt too private, too raw, like admitting I didn't trust my own son. Driving back, the sun dipped low, painting the trees orange. My kitchen felt emptier without the box. The table's bare surface a relief and a regret. I told myself I'd done something generous, spared myself the risk of hope. But deep down, I knew I was running from what the cookies might mean. That night, I stood in the doorway, staring at the empty table. The house creaked around me, the silence louder than ever. I thought of Elias and Charlotte, his life a mystery, now his job as a data analyst, his marriage to Lila, the reasons he'd turned away. I'd spent years blaming myself, wondering what I'd done to push him so far. Had I been too soft, too strict, too blind? The note's words echoed. Let's start over. I wanted to believe it, to feel the warmth of a son coming home. But my heart stuttered, caught on the edge of something darker. I turned off the light and went to bed, not knowing I'd just set something terrible in motion. The next morning in my Asheville kitchen, I poured my second cup of coffee, the routine grounding me against the unease that lingered from Elias's package. The empty table stared back, a reminder of the cookies I'd given to Rachel. I was halfway through stirring in cream when my phone buzzed the screen, lighting up with a number I hadn't seen in 3 years, Elias. My hand froze, coffee sloshing over the mug's rim. I let it ring twice more, my heart thudding before I picked up my voice, barely steady. His came through smooth, too casual, like he was calling about the weather. He wished me a happy birthday a day late, and I gripped the mug tighter, feeling the warmth burn my palms. I mentioned the package, how unexpected it was after so long. He chuckled soft but strained, saying he wasn't sure I'd open it. I hesitated, then told him I hadn't kept the cookies I'd given them to Rachel. The line went silent, not the quiet of a dropped call, but something heavier, like the air had thickened. When he spoke again, his voice was sharper, a blade hidden in velvet. He repeated my words, each one, clipped. I gave them to Rachel. I stammered, explaining she loved sweets, that it felt right to share. But his tone shifted, not just anger, something raw, almost panicked. He said the cookies were for me, only me, his voice cracking on the edge of something I couldn't name. I sat down hard, the chair creaking under me. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls closer. I tried to laugh it off, saying I didn't know they were so special, but his silence cut deeper than words. Then quietly, with a bitterness that chilled me, he said I never understood him. Before I could respond, he hung up the dial tone, humming like a warning. My hand shook as I set the phone down, coffee forgotten. His words, only me, echoed not a plea, but a demand. I stared at the counter, my mind racing back to his childhood, the way he'd go still when things didn't go his way, storing slights like ammunition. Outside, the Asheville morning was bright, but my house felt dim, the light struggling through the curtains. I didn't move for a long time, my pulse loud in my ears. Why did it matter so much that I hadn't eaten the cookies? What was in them that made his voice turn like that? I thought of Rachel, her warm smile when I handed her the box. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I'd meant to be kind, but now I wondered if I'd handed her something dangerous instead. The morning after Elias's call, my Asheville kitchen felt like a stranger's house, the air heavy with questions I couldn't answer. I stood by the sink, washing the same mug over and over, replaying his voice sharp, panicked accusing. Only me. Why did it matter so much that I gave the cookies to Rachel? The phone call had ended abruptly, leaving a hollow ache, like I'd stepped too close to an edge I couldn't see. I was about to pour another coffee when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Lila Elias's wife. Her voice was thin, strained like she was holding herself together with thread. Rachel was in the hospital. My knees buckled, and I gripped the counter. Lila said Rachel had collapsed that morning, vomiting, disoriented, unable to stand. At first, they thought it was the flu, but it got worse fast. The ER was running tests, but nothing made sense yet. Then Lila mentioned the cookies. Rachel had eaten some raving about their delicate icing before she fell ill. My mouth went dry, the mug slipping from my hands into the sink. I mumbled that I'd given her the box Elias sent, that I hadn't eaten any myself. Lila paused, hospital noises, buzzing in the background, Beep's footsteps, a distant cart. She asked if I thought the cookies could have made her sick. I couldn't answer, not out loud. I just promised to call if I remembered anything. After we hung up, I stood frozen, the kitchen clock ticking too loudly. My mind churned, pulling me back to the day before, when I'd tossed out the wrapping from Elias's package. I opened the trash can, digging past coffee grounds and paper towels, until I found it, a small, clear plastic bottle, like one for vitamins, tucked in the mess. No label, just a faint ring of white powder inside. My heart thudded deep and slow. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before. I set it on the counter, its presence louder than any sound in the house. I opened the fridge where I'd stashed one cookie in a Tupperware container, a small act of caution I hadn't questioned until now. It sat there pristine, its blue icing gleaming under the light. I didn't touch it. Instead, I thought of Elias, his precision, his silences, the way he'd always planned things meticulously. Had he planned this? The note, "Let's start over," felt like a lie, now a lure. Rachel was in the hospital, and I'd given her the cookies meant for me. The bottle glinted, accusing. I sank into a chair, the Asheville morning bright outside, but cold inside, wondering what I'd just escaped and what I'd done. The small plastic bottle sat on my Asheville kitchen counter, its faint white powder catching the morning light like a secret I wasn't meant to find. The cookie in the fridge, sealed in its Tupperware, felt like a ticking clock. Rachel was in the hospital, her collapse tied to the cookies I'd given her, cookies Elias sent for me. My hand shook as I poured tea. I wouldn't drink the steam rising in useless curls. His voice from yesterday's call echoed sharp and unsteady. Only me? The note, "Let's start over." Twisted in my mind, no longer a gesture of peace, but a trap I'd narrowly dodged. I needed answers, and I needed them quietly. I thought of Dr. Jenna Marshall, a toxicologist I'd known from my library days. She'd borrowed rare books for her research, always returning them with a smile and a promise of a favor owed. I dialed her number, my voice low as I explained the cookie, the bottle, Rachel's illness. I didn't say Elias's name, not yet, just that I needed something tested, no questions asked. Jenna's tone was light but serious. She agreed to meet me at her lab that morning. I slipped the cookie into a Ziploc bag, the bottle in another, and tucked both into my purse, my movements mechanical, like I was watching someone else's hands. Driving to the lab, Asheville's spring greenery blurred past the Blue Ridge Mountains, a distant comfort I couldn't feel. Memories of Elias flooded in unbidden. At 8, he'd rearrange my spice jars by size, snapping if I mixed them up. At 16, he'd thrown out a cake I baked because the frosting was wrong. His face blank, but his eyes hard. I'd called it perfectionism, told myself. It was his brilliance at work. But there were other moments, his stillness when I disappointed him, the way he'd study my reactions, like he was filing them away. I'd ignored those warnings, wrapped them in love, but now they clawed at me. At the lab, Jenna met me in the parking lot, her lab coat too crisp for the early hour. She raised an eyebrow at the Ziploc bags, but didn't press. "This the kind of favor I'll regret?" she asked, half joking. I tried to smile, but it crumbled. "Just tell me what's in it," I said. She nodded and disappeared inside. I sat in my car engine, off the silence pressing against me. Rachel's face flashed in my mind, her warm laugh, her wind chimes. I'd meant to be kind, giving her the cookies. Now I wondered if I'd handed her poison. The mountains loomed through my windshield, steady and indifferent, as I waited for answers that might break me. I sat in my car outside Jenna's lab in Asheville, the engine off the silence so thick it felt like it could choke me. The Ziploc bags with the cookie in the mysterious bottle were gone, handed over to Jenna, who disappeared into the medical complex with a promise to call soon. My hands were cold despite the spring warmth gripping the steering wheel, as if it could anchor me. Rachel was still in the hospital, her condition a mystery, tied to the cookies I'd given her. Cookies Elias had sent with a note that now felt like a lie. "Let's start over." His voice from our call haunted me, sharp and fraying. Only me. I couldn't shake the fear that I'd been the target. Memories of Elias kept surfacing, jagged and unwelcome. At 12, he'd spent hours sketching perfect geometric patterns, tearing them up if a single line was off. At 18, he'd stopped eating my cooking for weeks, claiming it tasted wrong, his eyes cold as he pushed the plate away. I'd brushed it off as teenage quirks, but now those moments felt like warnings I'd ignored. He'd always been precise, controlled, his anger quiet but deliberate like a storm, building out of sight. Had he planned this? The cookies, so carefully iced, didn't feel like love. They felt like a calculation. My phone rang just after noon, jarring me upright. Jenna's voice was steady but grave. She'd run tests, then gone deeper, when the first results raised flags. The cookie contained traces of Aconitum monkshood, a poison so rare it was almost unheard of in food. "This wasn't an accident, Maria," she said, her words landing like stones. I closed my eyes, my breath shallow. The bottle's white powder matched the compound. My son, my Elias, had sent me poison wrapped in a blue ribbon. I thanked Jenna, my voice small, and hung up the car. Suddenly, too small, too hot. I stared through the windshield at the Asheville skyline, the Blue Ridge Mountains distant and unmoved. Rachel's collapse replayed in my mind, her laughter over the cookies, now replaced by hospital monitors. I'd given her the box to avoid facing Elias's gesture, to dodge the hope and fear it stirred. Now she was fighting for her life, and I was left with the truth. Elias hadn't just wanted to hurt me, he'd planned it with the precision I'd once admired. My hands shook as I started the car. The engine's hum, a poor cover for the dread pooling inside me. I drove home, the cookie's absence a ghost in my purse, wondering how the boy I'd raised had become someone I didn't recognize. Back in my Asheville home, the kitchen felt like a crime scene, the empty table mocking me where Elias's package once sat. Jenna's call still echoed monkshood, a poison in the cookie meant for me. My son had crossed a line I couldn't unsee, and I needed to know why. I drove to Charlotte that afternoon, my phone tucked in my coat pocket, set to record. The decision felt reckless, but I wasn't the mother waiting for apologies anymore. I was a woman chasing the truth. The Blue Ridge Mountains faded in my rear view, their calm a stark contrast to the storm inside me. Elias lived in a sleek condo, all glass and sharp angles, like he'd designed his life to match his precision. When he opened the door, his smile was tight, not reaching his eyes. He looked thinner, hollowed out, like something was eating him from within. He invited me in, his voice light, asking about Rachel's health, as if we were just catching up. I nodded, keeping my tone even, saying I wanted to check in after our call. The kitchen was spotless knives, aligned perfectly, a place where chaos wasn't allowed. I mentioned the cookies, how lovely they were, watching his face. I said, Rachel loved the star-shaped one. Best a detail I made up to test him. His eyes flickered just for a second before he recovered. He said, Rachel always liked pretty things. His voice too smooth, too quick. My heart thudded. He'd taken the bait, confirming he knew the cookies' shapes, something I hadn't shared. I pressed further casual, asking when he'd learned to bake. He laughed a hollow sound, claiming it was a new hobby to unwind. I mentioned monkshood, watching his spine stiffen, a subtle shift, like a predator deciding its next move. He said he didn't know what that was, but his hands betrayed him, gripping a glass too tightly. I glanced at the counter behind him, catching a glimpse of a small plastic bottle, identical to the one in my trash, half hidden under a towel. My pulse raced, but I kept my face neutral. He moved to block it, stretching casually. But I'd seen enough. I said I should go, wishing Rachel well, my voice steady, despite the fear clawing at me. As I left the phone in my pocket, kept recording, capturing every word, every pause. In my car, doors locked, I replayed the moment he slipped his voice sharp with knowledge he shouldn't have. The Asheville dusk settled around me as I drove back. The bottle's image burned into my mind. I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was the woman he'd underestimated, and I had proof. The drive back to Asheville from Elias's condo felt endless. The Blue Ridge Mountains blurring into the dusk as my phone burned a hole in my coat pocket. The recording I'd made, his slip about the star-shaped cookie, the tension in his voice when I mentioned monkshood, played over and over in my mind. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I tried to reconcile the boy I'd raised with the man who'd sent me poison. The small plastic bottle I'd spotted on his counter, identical to the one in my trash, loomed like evidence I couldn't ignore. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the night was heavy, and so was my heart. The next morning, my phone rang, pulling me from a restless sleep. It was Detective Felix Reed, his voice calm but professional, saying Dr. Jenna Marshall had flagged the toxicology results and suggested I speak with him. I sat at my kitchen table, the empty space where Elias's package once sat, now a void of its own. I told Felix about the cookie, the bottle Rachel's collapse, and my visit to Elias. My voice shook as I admitted the recording, how Elias had known details he shouldn't. Felix asked if I'd submit the items as evidence, the cookie, in its Ziploc, the bottle with its faint white powder. I hesitated, the weight of turning on my son pressing against my ribs. I drove to the police station, a small office tucked behind Asheville's main square. Felix was younger than I'd expected, his sharp eyes scanning me as he offered water I didn't take. My hands wouldn't stop moving, twisting a tissue I didn't remember grabbing. He asked about Elias, how long we'd been estranged, what the package meant, why I gave the cookies to Rachel. I answered plainly each word, a step further from the mother I'd been. Then he asked the question I dreaded. Did I believe Elias meant to harm me? I looked at my hands, the tissue fraying. I don't want to, I said, but the poison was in the cookie. He sent it. Felix nodded, jotting notes on a yellow pad, his face unreadable. He asked if there was a motive, money, resentment, something buried in our past. I flinched, thinking of Elias's silences, his blame for things I couldn't fix, like his father's absence, or my own imperfect love. I agreed to hand over the cookie and bottle my voice barely a whisper. It felt like betrayal, but what choice did I have? If Elias could do this once, what stopped him from trying again? As I left the station, the Asheville sky darkened, and I wondered if I'd ever known my son at all. The Asheville night pressed against my windows, the house creaking as I sat on my couch, The phone still warm from sending Detective Felix Reed the recording of Elias. My hands trembled as I hit send the audio file, a small betrayal that felt monumental. Elias's voice, his slip about the star-shaped cookie, the edge in his tone when I mentioned monkshood. It was proof fragile but undeniable that my son had meant to harm me. The kitchen table, once home to his package, stood empty, but the weight of what I'd done filled the room. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a witness, maybe an accuser. I kept seeing his face at the condo, thinner hollowed his tight smile, hiding something I couldn't name. I thought of the bottle on his counter, identical to the one in my trash. Its white powder, a silent confession. My heart thudded not fast, but deep, like it wanted to be heard. I'd spent years excusing Elias's quirks, his rigid need for control, his cold silences when I failed him. Now those memories felt like clues to a puzzle I'd refused to solve. Had he always been capable of this? The note, "Let's start over," mocked me now, a lure wrapped in blue ribbon. Sleep didn't come. The hallway lights stayed on, casting shadows that made every creak feel like a threat. I kept the phone close, checking it for updates from Felix, but it stayed silent. I thought of Rachel still in the hospital, her life hanging on the edge of my mistake. I'd given her the cookies to avoid facing Elias's gesture, to keep my heart safe from hope. Now that choice haunted me, tying her fate to his plan. I paced the living room, the Asheville air thick with spring humidity, my mind replaying our last call. His anger when I said I gave the cookies away, the panic in only me. By morning, I felt hollow, the decision to send the recording settling like a stone in my chest. I wasn't protecting Elias anymore. I was protecting anyone else he might hurt. The boy who'd folded napkins with surgical precision, who'd watched me eat with unnerving focus, wasn't the son I'd imagined. He'd calculated this poison in cookies, a gift meant to end me. As the sun rose over the Blue Ridge Mountains, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty space where the package had been. I'd sent Felix the truth, but it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like losing Elias all over again, this time for good. The phone stayed silent, but I knew the call was coming, and with it, the end of the life I'd known. The Asheville dawn crept through my curtains, pale and unyielding. As I sat on the couch, the phone still silent after sending Detective Felix Reed the recording of Elias. My eyes burned from a night without sleep, the hallway light still on, casting long shadows across the floor. The recording, Elias's voice, his slip about the star-shaped cookie, the sharpness when I mentioned monkshood, felt like a blade I'd turned on my own son. I kept seeing the bottle on his counter, the twin to the one in my trash, its white powder, a quiet accusation. My heart ached not just for what he'd done, but for the years I'd spent hoping he'd come back to me. By noon, Felix called. His voice was steady professional, saying the recording paired with Jenna's toxicology report gave them enough for a warrant. Elias had been taken in that morning quiet and composed as if he'd rehearsed this moment. I didn't ask to see him. I couldn't. The boy I'd raised, who'd folded napkins into perfect triangles, who'd watched me with eyes that saw too much, was gone, replaced by a man who'd sent poison disguised as a gift. I stayed home, the Asheville air, heavy with spring dampness, my kitchen table, a silent witness to the package that started it all. I thought of Rachel still unconscious in the hospital, her life tangled in my choice to give her the cookies. I'd meant to be kind, to share something beautiful, but instead, I'd handed her Elias's trap, the note. "Let's start over" felt like a cruel joke now, its blue ink etched in my mind. I wondered when he'd decided I was the target, when the son I'd loved had turned resentment into something darker. Had it been the years of silence, the arguments I couldn't fix, or something deeper, something I'd never seen? The house creaked around me, each sound sharper in the quiet. I didn't turn on the radio or make tea. I just sat staring at the empty table, trying to understand how we'd come to this. Elias's arrest didn't feel like justice. It felt like a door slamming shut. I'd spent years waiting for him to call, to explain the silence, but now I had answers I didn't want. The Blue Ridge Mountains stood outside my window, steady and indifferent, as I grappled with the truth. My son had planned to end me, and I'd stopped him, but at what cost? The phone stayed quiet now, but the weight of what I'd done pressed harder. A reminder that motherhood doesn't end, even when the child becomes a stranger. The Asheville sun hung low, casting a soft glow through my kitchen window, but the warmth couldn't reach me. Elias was in custody, his arrest a quiet fact that felt like a scream in my chest. The recording I'd sent Detective Felix Reed, his voice, his slip about the star-shaped cookie, had sealed his fate, paired with Jenna's toxicology report, confirming monkshood in the cookie meant for me. I sat at my empty kitchen table, the space where his package once rested, now a void I couldn't fill. I kept seeing Rachel's face, her warm smile, when I handed her the cookies, now replaced by hospital tubes and uncertainty. I'd gone to see her at St. Luke's, needing to face what my choice had done. Rachel was awake finally, her eyes cloudy but alive. Lila, her daughter, and Elias's wife sat beside her, red-eyed and silent. I stood in the doorway, my hands twisting together, and told them everything: the cookies, the poison, the recording, Elias's arrest. Lila's face crumpled, but she didn't speak. Rachel reached for my hand, her grip weak but steady, and squeezed once. She didn't ask for details, didn't need them. Her silence said she understood the weight of what I'd carried. I whispered an apology, my voice breaking, and she squeezed again, absolving me in a way I didn't deserve. Back home, Lila came over later, her eyes hollow as she sat at my table. She told me about Elias's journals, found tucked away in their Charlotte condo pages, of meticulous notes on plants, extractions, dosages, written under a false name for obscure herbalist forums. The words matched the monkshood in Rachel's blood work, chilling in their precision. Lila hadn't known, hadn't seen the signs, but she remembered Elias growing distant, his late nights at the computer jars of dried leaves she thought were harmless. She blamed herself, but I knew that guilt was mine too. I'd raised him, loved him, missed the darkness growing inside him. The Blue Ridge Mountains stood outside their steady presence, mocking my unraveling world. I thought of Elias as a boy, his need for control, his silences that cut deeper than words. I'd called it brilliance, but it was something else, something I'd refused to name. Now Rachel was recovering, but the cost was heavy. Lila left, promising to call, and I sat alone, the house creaking around me. The cookies were gone, but their shadow lingered, a reminder of how close I'd come to being the one in that hospital bed. I'd stopped Elias, but the truth didn't feel like victory. It felt like losing the last piece of the son I thought I knew. The Asheville evening settled around my house, the air thick with the scent of spring rain. I stood in my kitchen, the table bare, except for a sealed evidence bag Detective Felix Reed had given me, containing the last cookie, the one I'd saved its blue icing dulled, but still gleaming faintly under the lamp. Elias was in custody, his journals exposing a chilling obsession with poisons, his arrest a quiet end to the plan he'd woven into that blue-ribboned box. Rachel was recovering, but the truth of what he'd done to her, to me, hung heavy, a wound that wouldn't close. I held the bag its weight, heavier than it should have been, a symbol of the son I'd lost. I kept replaying the moment I gave Rachel the cookies, thinking it was kindness, a way to dodge the hope and fear. Elias's note stirred. Let's start over. Now I saw it for what it was, a trap meticulously crafted, meant to end me. My hand shook as I set the bag down, my mind pulling me back to Elias as a boy. His precise folds, his cold stares, when I got something wrong, the way he'd watch me eat, like he was testing me. I'd called it love, told myself I was enough, but I'd missed the signs, the sharpness behind his eyes, the plans he held close. The house creaked the Blue Ridge Mountains, a dark silhouette beyond my window. I thought of Rachel's weak grip in the hospital, Lila's tear-streaked face as she spoke of Elias's journals. They'd found his online posts clinical and detached detailing monkshood's effects like a recipe. The bottle in my trash, the one on his counter, they weren't accidents. He'd meant for me to eat the cookies, to trust the gesture to fall. I'd escaped by chance, but Rachel hadn't, and that guilt pressed against my ribs, sharp and unrelenting. I slid the evidence bag into a drawer, not ready to let it go, but unable to keep looking at it. The note's words burned in my mind, a cruel promise of reconciliation that hid poison. I wasn't sure who I was angrier with, Elias for his betrayal, or myself for believing he could change. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls closing in as I stood there alone with the truth. I'd stopped him, turned over the recording, the cookie, the bottle, but it didn't feel like saving anyone. It felt like severing the last thread of the son I'd loved. Outside, the rain began to fall soft against the roof, and I wondered if I'd ever feel safe in this house again, or if Elias had taken that from me too. The Asheville rain had stopped by morning, leaving my lawn glistening, but still stubbornly brown. I sat at my kitchen table, the drawer with the sealed evidence bag, the last cookie closed, but not forgotten. Elias was in custody, his journals and the toxicology report, painting a portrait of a man I didn't recognize, one who'd laced cookies with monkshood meant for me. Rachel was recovering at St. Luke's, her strength returning slowly, but the shadow of what happened lingered. Lila, her daughter, and Elias's wife, came to my house that afternoon, her eyes tired but softer than before. We sat together, two women bound by a betrayal neither of us saw coming. Lila spoke quietly, stirring tea. She didn't drink, saying she'd missed the signs, Elias's late nights, his strange notations, the jars of dried plants she'd thought were harmless. She blamed herself, but I reached for her hand, feeling the weight of my own guilt. I'd raised him, loved him through his silences, his need for control, and still hadn't seen this coming. We didn't talk about the trial looming or the journals that detailed his obsession with poisons. Instead, we shared small memories. Rachel's wind chimes, her laugh, the way she'd arrange flowers with care. It felt like rebuilding something, even if it was fragile. Rachel's recovery became our anchor. I visited her when Lila couldn't, sitting by her hospital bed, watching her breathe easier each day. She never asked about Elias, and I didn't offer. Once she took my hand, her grip stronger now, and said she was glad I hadn't eaten the cookies. Her eyes held no blame, only gratitude, and I felt a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. The Blue Ridge Mountains stood outside her window, steady as ever, and I clung to their permanence, needing something to believe in. Back home, the house felt different, quieter, but not as empty. Lila's visits became regular, her presence a reminder that we were tied by more than loss. We didn't speak of Elias often, but when we did, it was with a shared sadness, not anger. I thought of him as a boy, folding napkins with precision, and wondered where I'd failed him, or if I had at all. The guilt was still there, but it was softer now, like a bruise fading. I'd stopped him, saved Rachel by chance, and maybe saved myself. The kitchen table, once a stage for his package, was just a table again, holding mugs and moments with Lila. I wasn't whole yet, but I was learning to live with the pieces, finding strength in the bonds that survived Elias's betrayal. The Asheville mornings grew softer as spring deepened, the Blue Ridge Mountains catching the first light outside my kitchen window. I stood by the counter, a mug of coffee warming my hands, the house quieter, but no longer heavy with dread. Elias was in custody, his trial pending, the monkshood-laced cookie, and his chilling journals, evidence of a betrayal I was still learning to carry. Rachel was home now, her recovery slow but steady, and Lila's visits to my house had become a ritual, a thread tying us together. The drawer with the sealed evidence bag, the last cookie, and Elias's note stayed closed, but I knew it was there a reminder of what I'd almost lost. I took out a small, fireproof box from the hall closet one quiet afternoon, its metal cool against my fingers. I placed the evidence bag inside the cookie's dulled icing, barely visible through the plastic, alongside the card that read, "Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over." I locked the box and set it on the highest shelf, not to hide it, but to hold it proof of the truth I'd faced. It wasn't about forgetting Elias. It was about remembering what my instincts had saved me from. The act felt final, like closing a book I'd never read again, though its weight lingered. The house felt like mine again, its creaks familiar, not threatening. I thought of Elias less as the son I'd lost, and more as a puzzle I'd never solve. His childhood flashed through me, his precise folds, his silences, the way he'd watch me eat with eyes that saw too much. I'd loved him fiercely, but love hadn't been enough to see the darkness growing. Now, I was learning to let go of the guilt, to stop asking what I could have done differently. Rachel's recovery, Lila's quiet strength, they reminded me there was life beyond his betrayal. I walked outside the Asheville air, warm the lawn, still stubborn, but alive with new weeds I hadn't noticed before. The Blue Ridge Mountains stood steady, their ridges a quiet promise of endurance. I wasn't the mother waiting for Elias to return anymore. I was Maria, 60, a retired librarian who'd faced a truth most would run from. The box on the shelf wasn't a shrine to pain, it was a marker of survival. I trusted my instincts, saved Rachel by chance, and protected myself from a plan I hadn't seen coming. As I stood on the porch, the swing creaking softly, I felt the first stirrings of peace. Not full, not final, but enough to keep going. The mountains watched, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The Asheville summer was creeping in the Blue Ridge Mountains, glowing under a haze of morning light as I sat on my porch swing, coffee in hand. The house behind me felt different now, still creaky, still mine, but no longer a place where fear lingered in the corners. Elias's trial was approaching, the monkshood-laced cookie, and his journals locked away as evidence. But I didn't dwell on the courtroom. I'd locked his note, "Let's start over," and the last cookie in a fireproof box, high on a shelf, not to erase him, but to mark the moment I chose myself over his betrayal. The lawn stretched out still, patchy, but stubborn like me. Lila came by often, her visits a quiet comfort. We'd sit at my kitchen table talking about Rachel's recovery, her florist shop blooming again, or the small things, new books. The weather, anything but Elias. When his name did come up, it was softer now, less a wound than a scar. I'd stopped asking why he'd done it, why he'd sent poison disguised as a gift. The boy who'd folded napkins with precision, who'd watched me with eyes too sharp, was gone long before the cookies arrived. I'd loved him, but I couldn't carry his choices anymore. Rachel invited me to her shop one afternoon, her wind chimes singing as I walked in. She hugged me, her strength back, her smile warm but knowing. We didn't talk about the hospital or the cookies, just arranged flowers together. Her hands steady as she clipped stems. That silence was enough a shared understanding that we'd survived something together. The Blue Ridge Mountains framed the shop's windows, their steady presence a reminder that some things endure. I drove home feeling lighter, like I'd left a piece of guilt behind with the roses and lilies. My house was my own again, the kitchen table no longer a stage for Elias's package, but a place for coffee with Lila, for crosswords, for life. I was Maria Grayson. 60, a woman who'd faced her son's darkness and walked away. The box on the shelf wasn't a burden. It was proof I'd trusted my instincts, saved Rachel, and maybe myself. I wasn't waiting for Elias to explain or return. I was building something new, not perfect, but real. As I sat on the porch, the swing swaying gently, I looked at the mountains and felt a quiet strength. I'd lost a son, but I'd found myself, and that was enough to keep going one creaky step at a time. The Asheville sun dipped low, painting the Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of gold as I sat on my porch swing, the creak of familiar rhythm now. My coffee was warm, the lawn still patchy but alive, and the house behind me felt like home again. Elias's trial loomed somewhere beyond my horizon, his monk's hood-laced cookies and journals. A chapter I'd closed, locked away in a fireproof box with his note, "Let's start over." I'd faced the truth of my son's betrayal, saved Rachel by chance, and found a strength I didn't know I had. The journey wasn't over, but I was Maria Grayson 60, no longer defined by his choices, ready to share what I'd learned. This story, my story, isn't just about poison or a package tied with a blue ribbon. It's about listening to that quiet voice inside the one that whispers something's wrong even when you want to believe in love. I ignored that voice for years, excusing Elias's silences, his need for control, thinking it was just his way. But when that package arrived, when Rachel fell ill, that voice became a shout, and it saved me. I'm sharing this because I know I'm not alone. We've all had moments where our instincts screamed, but we pushed them down, afraid of what they meant. Maybe it was a person, a choice, a feeling you couldn't name. I'm here to say trust it. I think of Rachel arranging flowers again, her wind chimes singing. I think of Lila, her quiet visits, our shared healing. They're proof that even after betrayal, there's life on the other side. The Blue Ridge Mountains stand outside my window, steady and unchanging, reminding me to keep going. I'm not the mother waiting for Elias anymore. I'm Maria rebuilding, finding peace in small moments, a mug of coffee, a friend's laugh, a lawn that's trying just like me. If my story resonates, if you've ever faced a truth that broke your heart but set you free, I want to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience, of people who faced the unthinkable and came out stronger. Comment below. Have you ever had to trust your instincts when everything else told you not to? What did you learn? Your story might help someone else take that first step. And if you're carrying a weight like I was, don't wait for a package to force your hand. Listen to that whisper. It might just save you too. As the mountains fade into dusk, I'm here swinging gently, ready for whatever comes next. Let's keep telling these stories together.